What's cracking, everyone? My name is Ryan, and today we're going to be taking a look at a total package of a headphone, and that is the FiiO FT5. Let's check it out. So the FT5 is an open back planar magnetic headphone from FiiO. It's actually FiiO's first planar magnetic headphone. It retails in at $449. And I do want to send a big thank you out to Apos Audio, who did provide me with the FT5 in exchange for all of my honest thoughts and all of my honest opinions. Now, before we get into the technical details of the headphone, I think we need to take a look at what's exactly inside the box, because I honestly believe that is the biggest selling point of the FT5. Hold on a second, quick channel plug here. I am trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of 2024. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel, join my Patreon, support me along the way. I would highly appreciate that. All right, so the first thing you're gonna see when you open up the box is a very nice leather zippered case. You open it up, you see the FiiO headphone. You're gonna notice that it has protein leather pads that are already on the headphone, and then you get an alternate set of suede pads. You're going to notice you get a velvet black bag to carry it in if you don't want to use the zippered case. Then you're also going to get a cable that is a modular system, which I really like this about the cable. It's about 1.5 meters in length, but it has a modular system. So at the end, you can connect either a 3.5 that's got a 6.3 adapter. You can connect a 4.4 with an XLR adapter if you choose. And all of that is inside the box. So you can get both balanced and unbalanced connections inside the box. By the way, that cable does terminate to dual 3.5 mils to the cup. And I gotta say, the cable itself is nicely made. It lays flat. I don't have any issues with it kinking up or anything like that. All right, and so quickly touching on the technical specifications of the driver, it is a 90 millimeter planar magnetic driver. There are 20 neodymium magnets on each driver, and it is also a micron plated aluminum silver alloy on the coils. Now, I could go a lot more into details on the driver, but instead, I'm just going to go ahead and link FiiO's site down below so you can check this out yourself. There's a lot of information about the technology behind this driver. I can tell you that it's 36 ohms of impedance and 96 dB per 1 milliwatt, or 110 dB per 1 volt, depending on which way you look at that. So basically what that means, with planar magnetic drivers, in my opinion, you should always have some type of an amplifier if it's portable. You know, something like that is going to work. My Cayin RU7, for instance, worked perfectly fine with this headphone. Desktop amps, anything like that, I think is going to do you fine with this, but I do recommend an amp with this headphone. Now with that, let's take a look at the build and comfort before we move on to sound. All right, so taking a look at the build of the FT5, the first thing I can tell you is this is an all metal chassis for the most part, and it is solid in the hand. This is a very nicely built headphone, in my opinion, coming in at this price point. It has slight swivel. It's got tilt to the cups as well, which is a nice little added touch. Now the headband up top, I believe this is also metal and, you know, perhaps a little bit sharp, but I don't think you're going to cut yourself on that. So the machining's done pretty well there as well. The strap underneath is a leather-like material. It's a little bit stiff, but it's comfortable. It's got good padding to it. I haven't had any issue with that. And then the adjustment system is self-adjusting, which is nice. So it'll stretch to the size of your head and then detract when you take it off your head. And it's just really well put together, in my opinion, for the build. Now the pads, as I said, you get two sets of pads. The leather protein pads that are on this right now, these are pretty thick and comfortable, but they're not the most breathable pads is the only thing I would say about them. And then the ear cutouts of these are not super wide. So if you have bigger ears, kind of like I do, you know, they are probably going to touch on the sides, but they're deep enough. So I didn't feel like my ears were touching, you know, the inside of the driver housing or anything like that. But it does get warm in your head. I will warn you on that. I definitely had some warmth when I've worn them. And that includes the suede pads, believe it or not. The suede pads don't really add a lot of coolness. They're the same size. They are comfortable as well. But again, they are a little bit warm on my ears. I think the comfort weight-wise is okay. I think it's around 456 grams of weight. So little on the heavy side, not too bad. And the clamp force is good so that it stays solid on the head. I don't have any kind of shifting or anything. It's just too warm for my taste as far as the comfort goes. over a period of time, I just noticed that bothering me a little more than what I would like to be honest, with the comfort. All right. Now, with all that out of the way, guys, let's talk about the sound of the FT5. All right. And so describing the sound of this to me, I would say is kind of a V-shaped tuning, but also a little bit W-shaped. What I mean by that is I do feel like this headphone gives you good bass extension. In fact, I feel like it elevates that bass extension ever so slightly when we get deeper into it. Then as we move into the upper bass region, I feel a little bit of a dropout, but then it picks back up. But then I feel some dropout again around, probably the lower treble, somewhere in that region. But then it kind of gives you a little bit of moments of peakiness that it picks back up into the upper treble. So that's what I'm talking about when I say kind of W-shaped. It's probably more V-shaped than anything, but that's the way I hear it. And that's really with both the leather and the suede pads. The difference between those two is going to be the suede pads is going to bring your stage in a little bit closer to you. It's going to give you a little bit more warmth in the treble region, I would say. Whereas the leather pads are going to give you the most details. It's going to give you the widest stage response you can get. And I also feel just a little bit more punchiness as well with the leather pads. Now I want to go into details into this further, but just note that I did prefer the leather pads with this headphone. So most of my listening was with the leather, and I will touch on those differences as we go through the detailed part of the sound, which let's do that next. And let's talk about that low end first. Okay, and to start this off, I'm just going to right away tell you the track Big Hammer by James Blake. I test this with pretty much any kind of bass response on a headphone. And what I can tell you with this is, like I said, it has good bass extension. It's got good fullness of that extension down low, but I feel like it loses the control of that bass extension ever so slightly to where it almost gives you kind of a vibrated tonality to it, but it doesn't rumble necessarily on the ears. It just almost gets there, if that kind of makes sense, to where I just don't feel like it's the best quality that I'm used to hearing from a planar headphone as far as that low bass extension goes. Another track is Cashmere by Marson. Now this one has that really low-ended extension too, and kind of the same thing. It just feels like it's not always the best quality. It's got good quantity, but not always the best quality of that lower extension. Now, as we get into that mid to upper bass, like I said, that's where it kind of smoothens out a little bit. And I feel like it's a better response in that region. Also, I do find good amount of slam on the bass, and I am happy to report that because that's something I personally enjoy, is to have some impact into my bass response. Now, with the suede pads, I would say it's pretty similar. You probably lose out a little bit on that bass extension rumble, I would say, and it's a little more smoothened out into the upper and mid bass, and it's probably not quite as slammy into that low end with the suede pads, to where I still preferred the leather pads, even though it wasn't always my preferred way of how the bass was presented, again, for a planar magnetic headphone. And that kind of continued as we went into the mid-range. And what I mean by continued is just some unevenness to it. So with the mid-range, I'm going to give you a track again right away called Meditation by Ryopi. Now this one is pianos and strings for the most part, but what I noticed on the piano keys with this is, one, there's not quite that precise detail I like to hear from the piano notes. And, I suppose I'm okay with that part of it, but the notes get a little bit blended. And I especially noticed that into more of that mid to upper mid range, where just kind of the notes, especially if you're doing, something on the lower registry and upper registry, where they're kind of bumping into each other and not giving you a good separation there. And that's where kind of that resolution of the mid range shows itself and shows the capability limitations of that. I also noticed that with rock and roll music that I love so much. This is not a very punchy headphone. It's got good slam to it, but it's interesting to not quite have the punch. And I especially noticed that sometimes drums sounded a little bit hollow. And so listening to that rock and roll music and things, you got that nice low end extension. It definitely had that to fill in like kick drums and things like that. But splashiness of drums, kind of was uninviting to me and just not a lot of fun to listen to, I gotta say, with that part of the mid-range. As I said, though, as you get into the upper mid-range, though, it does pick back up a little bit. So I'm happy to report vocals and things like that are present enough. They're not pushed forward or anything, but you do get a good sense of vocalists. And I found that in both male and female, to where it was a pleasing enough sound Just again, not quite what I wanted out of the mid-range from an overall tonal balance. How did that end up with the treble? Well, treble, to be perfectly honest, was even a little bit more of a roller coaster ride for me. There is definitely a dropout in the lower treble region to where things sound a little bit almost muffled in a way, or veiled, to where I feel like there just needs more clarity, needs more breath to vocals. Like I said, vocals are there, they just don't expand quite like I would want. And I think that's part of the treble and how that is tuned. But it does get a little bit spicy and stabby at times. I do pick up sibilants. Tracks that have sibilants, it definitely showcases that. But even some tracks that normally wouldn't have sibilants had ever so slight amounts of sibilants. You know, singers like Adele, things like that, just had some of that going. Now, I will say, listening to electric guitars and things, I enjoyed that. You know, I liked my blues music on this headphone just because it did have enough treble energy in that upper region to make those guitar plucks and things just crispy and very precise to me, where I enjoyed that sound of it. It's just the airiness just wasn't quite there for me. Now, you might think because of that, this is a very intimate headphone. It's really not. With the leather pads, you get some stage and some space with that. It's not overly wide, but it's wide enough. Now, I gotta say, with the suede pads, it brings it in, but it almost gives it a little bit more of a holographic image so that you can kind of hear through things a little better. But I gotta say, resolution wise, overall, between the mids and the highs, it's not quite there for me of what I would want with that resolution to give me a little bit more of that imaging out. Now, imaging in general, I think is very good on this headphone. I didn't have any problems with that. I didn't feel like anything sounded off left to right or center, anything in that nature. Stage wise, like I said, I found stage to be okay. It's nothing overly exaggerated, and that was trying with different amp pairings as well. Definitely on my IHA6, that stage was narrowed. On something like my HA-3A, that stage opened up. Lastly, I want to kind of talk about some alternative options to this headphone, and then we'll wrap this up. All right, and so the price range of this headphone is both a good and a bad thing. It's good because I don't think there's a ton of competition in this price range, but that also can be bad because there are some things that I find for my ears to be a little bit better. The first one is going to be the Ananda Nano. Now, that one typically can be had for around $499. Even though it definitely is a brighter headphone than this one, I felt like it's more spacious. I felt that nice low-end presence that I wanted out of this one. I think it was textured better. I think the resolution's better on the Nano. And I think that, you know, maybe as a total package doesn't quite have the value of this one, but sound quality wise, I do think, at least for my ears and what I think, is better than this one. And there's just other things that you can take a look at in that price range as well to give this some competition. But then even stepping down to even something like a HiFiMan Sundara, which I still think is an excellent value for a sub $300 headphone, in many ways beats out something like this. But then you have build quality concerns. You're going to have other things as well. And again, the total package, I think, is really a big selling point of this headphone for everything that you're going to get. And the aesthetics, gotta say, I dig the aesthetics of this headphone as well. So don't take just my word for this. Definitely look at other reviewers as well, see what their preferences are, because, you know, this is just something that doesn't quite fit my preferences for what I would like, but hey, it may fit you, and that's what you have to decide for yourself. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. If so, please smash that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and join my Patreon. Those are all ways to support this channel. I'm really trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I appreciate all your support in doing so. Also, please drop a comment down in the video. I would love to know if you think there are other options better than this, what you think of this headphone. Have you heard it? What do you think of the sound of this? All of those things are great to know. I thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.